Hey, I've gotten to chapter 9, finished up chapter 9 of The Actress by Anne Enright, um, which is Nora um, kind of reflecting back on her mother's life and her relationship with her mother, who was a famous actress, Catherine Catherine Odell, I think it was. And the O gets put in front of her name, of course, in the United States. She does indeed become a famous actress, at least for a little while, for a couple of pictures. But then we find that actually maybe one of the things that brought her down was she had a child out of wedlock, um, and kept it, even though the studio was very much have an abortion or else kind of thing, and she didn't. She took took little Nora back to Ireland, um, where was raised there, and they kind of bounce back and forth where she hears that they're ruining her career, and things seem to have passed her by. Now, whether that's because of her crossing the studio, becoming inconvenient that way, or if it's just simply she had a little it, but didn't have that big of an it. She continues on stage, a lot in London, stuff like that. Um, we get a good section here of Nora kind of on who's her father, who's your daddy. Um, and she's kind of going through various people. One of them being a cinematographer, who the second she meets him, Laszlo, who's retired, who kind of went back to Italy after when the Cold War kind of started heating up, and it was kind of rather inconvenient for him. He wasn't very welcome there, um, and she can tell the second he meets her that he's very meets her very kind of warmly and casually. That's like, oh yeah, this is my father, and indeed, no, not. Um, and there's an interesting thing with Laszlo because she thinks, oh, he's kind of a naturally kind of a, he would have been made a wonderful father and stuff like that. But then this young woman who's like naked underneath her, kind of a diaphanous shift, comes in carrying a babe, and gives the cinematographer kind of a sidelong look, and it's like, um, it's like, oh, it's she thought at times like, oh, maybe kind of the daughter thing like that. It's like, no, it's his super young mistress, and that at 35 she thought, oh, he would have been a wonderful father, but then now later, past her mother's age, she's like, oh, he's actually a bit of a creep, actually, um, you know, which is kind of this wonderful thing of kind of illustrative of just like how she differently processes things at her different ages, as like a child, as a teenager, as at 35, where at 35 she's like trying to have her own children, and she's like, I think I need to know where I came from and who my father was. And it's interesting because he says like, well, he sort of, Laszlo's like kind of like, well, isn't she more than enough? And it's like, yes, she was. She's such a gigantic presence that she actually did take up the space of probably both parents and even more. That thing, and she goes through the story that her mother told her about her father, and it was this whole thing about him crashing off a cliff in Big Sur, and oh, it was just never meant to be, and then there, and kind of evolves from that. It's like, he's this young, good-looking man, to it's like, oh, he had a wife, and she was cheating on, and it's like, oh, maybe they fought, and they both went over the cliff together, and the scarf kind of trailing up, kind of very cinematically in the thing. Um, and she basically kind of realizes she doesn't really know, it just may have been just some kind of passing encounter, just some casual sex, and it didn't particularly mean anything. And she says like, so I don't have daddy issues. I'm not dad, though she also slept with Neil Duggan, who is kind of another kind of male figure in her life, and it was kind of done as a revenge thing. An older man, who was kind of a part of her mother's life. Can't remember exactly right now, but we kind of go through all this, and it's slightly just like, how she's processing things, how she's trying to figure things, various facets of her mother's life out, and not having this father figure there. um, and then her, you know, becoming a young woman, having sex for the first time, and having this terrible fight with her mother trying to like, wallops her and throws her clothes out, and she sits out on the kind of like a park bench for a little while, and it's like and comes back and they're fine, and there's this whole stuff about how basically her mother, well, did not have very much money. Like the Hollywood money was lost, and the mother, kind of lost things continually, including supposedly a house that she had gotten dirt cheap in France from a friend of somebody else, but she forgot the name of the town, so she had lost this entire house. But so she was her finances were, to say the least, in disarray. There's a thing here of her father, who she kind of has a kind of a weird kind of relationship that's kind of similar to what Nora has with Catherine, of he's this aged dying man, dies of cirrhosis of the liver, but he's always got all these women who want to sleep with him, and it's like he's this old drunkard. It's like, I doubt very much, but it's like, no, she died of thing. And when he does die, she refuses to pay she have to figure out his debts, and she refuses to pay the morticians for the longest of times, and it's like, it's because she didn't have very much money. And it was at one of these points where that Nora sort of realized, oh, she needed to take over and start taking care of her mother that way. It was the end of her childhood, and there's that little bit of ruefulness of like, she was pretty young at the time when she kind of realized, oh, my mother needs my help. And her mother was always like, came off the stage, and it was like, would be asking her 5-year-old daughter, how was I? Just needing that validation, there. And it's like, oh, you're like an angel from, it's like I died, and and you were an angel from heaven. And it's like, and the mother would recount the story, leaving out the she died part. Though it's interesting that Nora talks about being on the side of the stage where you don't get the illusion. You see all the gaffer's tape and all the kind of the props and all the kind of everything holding everything up, the fakery at the back. But in some ways that actually made it more. And she was just, she talked about how she was entranced and very so alone, watching her mother sing or be on stage, be radiant on stage. And it's just like her mother as an actress, like acting, like whether where the real mother was, mother who wasn't actually Irish of birth. She was born in England. Her accent was a construct. All these various things of her mother. It's like, how could you tell? Like, I think there was a thing of here of like, getting married, and it's like, well, how could you tell that she actually meant I do? Because she was an actress. And there's a point where she talks about like, being on the stage for her first kind of like, big discovery curtain call, and it's like, oh no, you could tell there's this one instance there where she slipped from being the character, a brief instance between being the character and then being the actress, where there was actually a slight bit of herself just in that little instance there in between the two, that little gap between the part and the actress, where, oh, she is where is her mother. But it was very fleeting, which is like, this is kind of interesting stuff. And just the whole thing of both my parents are now dead, and I know I'm going to continue having a relationship with them until the day I die, because I will change, and my perspective will change on them as I go through life, which will make for more and more complicated, perhaps, of a relationship with them. Maybe less painful, possibly. I'm probably older than my father. I don't know how old my father was when he died, when he killed himself. Am I at that point with Nora, like Nora saying, "Oh, I'm older than my mother when she died"? It's like, I don't know how old my father was when he killed himself. Yeah, probably gonna be. I think he was in his late 50s, so I'm probably still a little bit younger, but you know, it's odd to think that somebody who is my contemporary this age could be like close, be my father could have been my contemporary. And yeah, yeah, so thinking of somebody not as this possibly older remote figure who I couldn't understand, but it's like, oh, he was a dude who had an alcohol problem and killed himself. And it's like, you know, versus looking at him as another individual versus looking at him as a son who was afraid of and felt inferior to and felt like he was a disappointment to this figure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it always brings up stuff, and in a good way, not in a kind of maudlin or in a kind of like, oh, I'm damaging my. I left off Shuggy Bane because it just felt too too for me in that thing. Whereas this is a little bit more measured, a little bit more layered and nuanced to me, which might be being unfair to Shuggy Bane. For some reason, Shuggy Bane just did not click with me, or maybe it clicked too much with me. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to leave it there though. That's Anne Enright, actress, up to chapter 9. More videos later.